Hello everyone, welcome back to more weapon retrospective stuff, and today we are going to be focusing on brushes. I have a bit to say about this class, and we're just going to jump right into it with Ink Brush. So, Ink Brush's balance history is a bit interesting. So, like with rollers, we have to talk about a universal change for brushes, which is brushes were able to do damage overlapping. And the way that works is very simple. Brushes used to have it to where their flick hitbox and the ink that comes out of the weapon were different hits. Now, the weapon itself does not have a hitbox at all, it is just the ink that comes out of it. This used to lead to a mechanic called damage overlapping, where brushes could kill in less hits, like Ink Brush killing in 3 or Octobrush killing in 2. However, this only worked at extremely close ranges. This mechanic is not completely lost to the series, as technically it is now borrowed by Splatanas, which do have separate hitboxes for both the main weapon and the slash attacks, just without a lot of the degree of randomness that brushes had, as well as the lack of damage up. So of course, this mechanic is more, centered around when it comes to this class, and that might be a point of discussion later. For now, though, brushes lost this mechanic. That's going to matter when we get to Octobrush, but for Ink Brush it really doesn't. It didn't utilize damage overlap that much because the range value you need to be was just really small, and Ink Brush just wasn't that good in Splatoon 1. Like, it needed this, so, its mobility stat isn't exactly great. And that was kind of the main thing that got improved over time. The movement speed while swinging was increased, and we buffed the strafe speed of, or not the strafe speed, we buffed the rolling speed with main power-up, and later in Splatoon 3, it would not require main power-up, but probably the most important change that we did with this weapon was that we allowed the weapon to be able to roll and not take damage from enemy ink while rolling. So you basically have perma ink res when you have your weapon rolling for Ink Brush. That was a change for it, and now doesn't matter. Before, if you did left turns, it would kind of suck. You would take a bit of damage. Now you don't. Does this apply to literally any other brush? No. And you can, like, pretty visibly see and hear the difference. Now, with right turns, it's not as prominent, but with left turns, it is pretty prominent. Of course, something like Paintbrush doesn't suffer as much as well because it's a little lighter, but you turn sharp enough, it will happen. The sharper you turn, the more noticeable it is. So this is a unique mechanic they put on Ink Brush. And while I do really like this mechanic, like I think this is a unique way to set rolling apart, I still do not understand why this is only on the Ink Brush. This was never put on the other two brushes at all. And this is going to be a point that we talk about for a bit, but in terms of how rolling works, rolling is given a lot of props on Ink Brush. It is the unique fastest. You're as fast as lightweight weapons. Since they've buffed the rolling speed, you get the perma ink res ability, and Ink Brush's kits will generally be pretty centered around utilizing this roll to get into good positions. And the other brushes do not get the same treatment. And we will talk about it when we get to the other brushes. But for now, it's one thing that I want to bring up right away to take a look at, is that Ink Brush is getting this ability focused on. Besides that, better damage, cheaper specials, like really cheaper specials. Ink Brush Nouveau was the good one, and even that one got to 160. Nowadays, it got to 180, and Ink Brush Nouveau in Splatoon 3 is now all the way up to 190p. So we've gotten that to be, a bit higher. And, yeah, then Splatoon 3 came around, and we got the rolling speed increase made, not an MPU effect. A little bit more wall damage, because sure, we were doing that change for a bit. And then just a little bit easier hit detection and the changes for MPU. So Ink Brush hasn't gotten many changes in this game, truthfully. It's just mainly the rolling speed one. And I don't think it really needed it. This weapon gets messed up already by the map design of this game. Like, I think wider, more open maps for Brush to get behind people is incredibly important for this weapon, and despite that, Ink Brush Nouveau is still a weapon capable of winning tournaments at the highest level in the right hands. Which is pretty impressive. Let's talk about the weapon kits. I hate this one. I hate this Ink Brush kit so much. And it's not because it's not synergistic, it's just the toolkit. A bomb on a brush is fine, I don't have a problem with it on the weapon. It's not like the most optimal thing at higher levels of play, which sounds a little bit weird to say, but it is. This weapon prefers to be rolling around and utilizing a lot of its ink tank. It doesn't like ink-hungry subs, but like, for most levels of play, you're gonna get value out of a bomb. Having a bomb on a brush kit is fine. The other brush kits want bombs. I don't have an issue with this. I dislike Killer Whale on it. The sad part is Killer Whale actually makes a lot of sense on this weapon, because you can roll around while you have the whale active, and then it makes it easier to get in or whatever. In practice, this weapon just spams Killer Whale, and Killer Whale is an annoying special I just do not like seeing in the game. Since day one, Killer Whale has been annoying Missile's brother, and it just hasn't changed from that. The special is annoying, it is not healthy for the game, it isn't particularly good either, which, thankfully, at least that's the case. At least we're keeping Killer Whale bad instead of making it really broken, so that's nice. Inkbrush Nouveau, on the other hand, is a kit I've come to appreciate a lot more. Originally, I wasn't the biggest fan of Hammer on this weapon because very close range special on an already very close range weapon that has a mine. You know, I got the idea behind it. Rolling will get you into good positions, and in those positions you could potentially utilize Hammer, you know, to extend kill streaks or whatever. But I think the synergy for this Inkbrush kit, while solid before, you know, while that did make sense for the weapon, it didn't feel as good until the Hammer change, where Hammer Throw can do like that. You know, where it has this big hitbox that you can play off of. Because I think that completely changed the game for this weapon. This is when we started to see this weapon doing better in tournaments. And I like this change because I think having the option for something long range, even if it's not particularly amazing or common, really gives this weapon more option select. Like, if you are trying to get in and you can't, you can go for a Hammer Throw. Like, it's something you can do on retake. If you get in, you now have to be worried about Inkbrush using Hammer as like a throw behind you, you know, like tossing it at you while it's behind you. That gives the Inkbrush more threat, you know, if you have a brush behind you and it has its special, there's more it has to do. And I like how that enhances the overall weapon gameplay. I really, really enjoy that. Like, I think that adds to the weapon quite a lot. Mine is fine, you know, you set it up when you get behind people, follows a lot of the same logic, right? Not too useful when you're locked out, but if you get in, you get rewarded because it adds one more thing to deal with when having to, like, take care of the flanking Inkbrush. And that's this weapon's identity, you know? Very mobile, has some very polarizing matchups when it gets behind enemy lines. It's very hard for some weapons like chargers or slower blasters to deal with it, and so you're forced to mess up your team's positioning, and Brush is also given tools, you know, to deal with it. It's an incredibly unique weapon archetype, and it works very well at its job. Even in a game with map design that actively hinders it, it works fairly well because it is a kit that does a good job for it. I like Inkbrush Nouveau. I think it's an incredibly healthy spot. I don't think there's much that needs to be done. I like the special output changes. My only thing I dislike is the mashing requirement. Talked about it with Squeezer briefly. Don't think it's a good idea. If you think that's my bias, that's fine. I wish there was an alternate way to be able to play it because, you know, as you can see, I have not played a single game of these in this game, as I just can't mash, so GG's. It's also annoying, you know, I will say, as well as another argument for the match requirement thing. This weapon will randomly show up in Salmon Run, and it makes the rotation unplayable. So that's cool. Okay, anyway. Octobrush. So, remember how I talked about damage overlapping? Yeah, that was Octobrush's whole identity. Damage overlapping gave it the best damage to Rainmaker Shield in the game. It had Beacon Kraken, which was a fairly useful kit. It gave it an identity on maps like Moray Towers, where it could use Kraken to get in instead of beacons, and then up close it would get kills. It was very interesting for that regard. It gave Octobrush a unique identity, and having to get super close to be able to two-shot, or knowing when you could play your distance and kill slower, especially in a game like S1, was a big part of the weapon's skill expression. In this game, it doesn't have that. After Splatoon 2, it doesn't. We gave it more damage, doesn't really matter too much. Its 3-shot is more consistent, I guess. And, I mean, this change was nice. Makes it easier to roll. MPU did nothing at all, like with the painting. This one was okay. Rolling faster was nice with MPU because Octobrush only rolls at like a 1.72. Inkbrush is like, I think, a 2.02 at this point, somewhere around there. So, okay, that's a little bit better. Then we took it away. Made it a little less ink hungry. Okay. Damage to wall, hitbox, ink consumption. We've been on this change for a while. Octobrush used to be way more ink hungry than it is now. And Octobrush is now not really that ink hungry. Like, you get a lot of flicks after a bomb. This does admittedly have like a little bit of ink saver main, right? But even if I were to take that off, Yeah, that's a lot better than before. And I don't necessarily hate that because unlike Inkbrush, Octobrush actually does really need to use its bomb in combat. It is a big part of the weapon's game plan because unlike Inkbrush, it sure as hell doesn't have the mobility to get behind people as effectively. So having a bit extra range to be able to jump at people or be able to shark and having bombs to utilize all makes a lot of sense for the weapon. But I don't get this weapon's identity outside of that because the rolling is just not good enough. Like the rolling on this weapon is slow, it is easy to track down, it can't turn sharply through enemy ink. It doesn't have any of that, and its weapon kits don't really do an amazing job at playing off of the fact that it could roll around. Like if you zip, okay, the zip recall could be left in an annoying position. That is a utility we see sometimes with zipcaster weapons, but typically it's not the best thing for this weapon because it will still most likely die on its recall. Unlike something like a hammer where you can still keep doing your thing. You know, it doesn't allow you to keep being a brush behind the enemy lines. Rain is not threatening enough, and setting up beacons behind is annoying, but it still doesn't lean into the identity as hard as Inkbrush does. And this kit is, like, probably the closest, but Kraken is just worse than Hammer at this in every way, because remember the whole part about Hammer that I talked about is that you also have this new long-range threat, and that adds to what you have to be worried about the enemy player might do because they have their special. Instead, you have a brush can turn into a Kraken and chase you down, and then be stuck in close range or have to use half its duration to get out. None of these, like, completely fail at their jobs, keep in mind, by the way. I actually quite like this kit. But in terms of rewarding you in a similar way to Inkbrush Nuvo did when you get behind enemy lines, it doesn't really do that. I think other options for this could have been something like Zuka, which was on Octobrush in the past, and the idea behind that was pretty simple, right? You get behind people, you can pop the Zuka, and if you can't get behind people, you can pop the Zuka. It gave it pretty good utility. It wasn't the most common kit, but like it made a lot of sense for the weapon. I can't fault them for adding Kraken to a weapon that had Kraken before, and it did work with Kraken in that game, but the full kit isn't the same, and I get that. It doesn't seem like that on paper, but for Octobrush in particular, it was kind of made sense to have both those tools because you would use Kraken to get behind people. In this game, if you use Kraken to get behind people, you're kind of trolling with it. The game just doesn't work in the same way Splatoon 1 did. The map design is different, yada yada yada. But, okay, I don't really mind this, you know, in-the-middle playstyle between, like, sharking and taking people down and, like, sometimes rolling around. But I don't like how either of them are particularly balanced. For example, if you're sharking and going up close, it's not complicated. The skill expression behind sharking and getting up close in Splatoon 1 is that you have to have a certain range value to get your good kill time, otherwise your kill time would be worse. Now your kill time is just solid no matter what. It will never be that good, it will never be that bad. You don't have to deal with either end of the extreme, and you don't have to deal with harsh spacing requirements. It's boring. To me, this is just more boring. As someone who played a lot of Octobrush and enjoyed learning the unique spacing for it, this is just not as fun. This is more simple and basic, and like, you know, maybe that's fine. I don't, you know, hate it being simple, but I had something more interesting before and lost it. And when it comes to rolling, really no incres effect when rolling, really no ability to roll like a little bit faster. Like we could have given it something, you know, like maybe it gets a little bit of a faster roll after rolling for a certain amount of time, or even just make it slightly faster at rolling. This is the slowest rolling brush in the game, and its speed is so outclassed, and we gave Paintbrush a better speed upon its launch, and we've buffed ink brushes over time, but Octobrushes is basically unchanged, other than you can start it a little bit faster. It's not good. It's not, like, bad enough to never be useful, but it's just kind of mediocre. It doesn't feel that good or bad to use, which is exactly how I describe the flicks. And that's my thoughts on Octobrush. Like, it feels fine as a main weapon, you know? It's okay. It has an identity that makes sense, but it's just not that special anymore. It used to be more special than that, and I kind of miss that. If it was translated better into another weapon, then maybe I wouldn't mind it as much, but there's no other brush that replicates that. As for the weapon kits, I like this kit, I like this kit, I don't terribly mind this kit. All of the kits are pretty average. The Zipcaster one is probably the best one. The Zip is very fun on this weapon, and like, to give a little bit of credit, I don't like Zip on short-range weapons in this game. It's not particularly good for them because of the lack of options. However, Octobrush is probably one of the easier ones to use. You have good mobility, you can like flick from a ledge to have it fall off and hit people. It's probably the best one out of all the short range Zipcaster weapons. In fact, not probably, it definitely is. So that's something, you know? Alright, last up is Paintbrush. This weapon's pretty hated. Yeah, I get why. So let's talk about Paintbrush for a bit. Paintbrush was originally balanced around being an incredibly ink-hungry weapon. And I mean incredibly ink-hungry. Every single flick on this weapon used 6.4% of your ink tank. On top of that, rolling was more ink-hungry by a lot. Rolling for 1 second cost about 15% of your ink tank. You had to deal with both of those. The first patch after this weapon came back, they toned both of them back by 25%. Drastic change, right? After that, they also made it so you could recover your ink 1/6 of a second faster. And then we increased the weapon's damage range, which a lot of people aren't going to like, you know. But this is its 2-shot and 3-shot damage range. We also made its minimum swing damage better, which, okay, this is fair. Why the hell was this 25 minimum? Okay. After that, we made it paint a little bit better, which is also fair. And we made it be able to recover ink after moving forward by this amount. So this is swinging delay, this is rolling delay. Both of these got 10 frames back. So we have a lot of ink efficiency changes. We made it cheaper special, and then we gave it a fire rate increase. Now, the fire rate changes are pretty rare in this game, and it's important to note that a fire rate change will revert part of the ink efficiency change. Like, it is no longer as ink efficient as before because it is shooting, you know, every 2 frames faster. So it reverts a little bit of the ink efficiency changes, but nowhere near where it used to be before. And that's it. That's the 11.2, the 11.0 rework changes that every weapon has. So this weapon and Dynamo draw a lot of comparisons. They both have this long windup before you start attacking, a long time before you can start getting picks, you know, and unfortunately both share some similar balance problems. In this case, Paintbrush was balanced by giving it ink efficiency. And if you know Dynamo's balance history, eventually, as Dynamo has hit a balance spot, ink efficiency had to take a bit of a hit for it. And Paintbrush's ink efficiency, yeah, it's pretty solid. It's not bad at all. And its rolling, I would say, is probably bad. Like, its rolling is pretty ink hungry. I don't really mind its rolling where it's at. I think its rolling is a fair spot. I would kind of go as far as to say the flicks are maybe a little bit too cheap. But who knows, you know? It's hard to say because the weapon is just strictly not good. What I also want to talk about is the fact that they extended its kill range. They made its kill range really far. And this is the part people find annoying about the weapon. People don't like that Paintbrush can 3-shot you from, like, this far away. How's Paintbrush's 2-shot range? Yeah. Yeah, it's bad. It's like, I think, exactly 1 line. And it can 2-shot you. My question is, why? Why, though? We don't have a 2-shot brush outside of this one, you know? This is the only one. And its 2-shot requires you to wind up to start swinging, right? This is the 2-shot range. This range was never increased. We have only increased the damage range for these kills. Now, personally, I can see both being annoying. But I think if I asked most people, which one is more annoying, 3-shotting from all the way over here, or 2-shotting like around here, I'm willing to bet this 2-shot range is probably going to be less irritating. Because the weapon has to get closer, right? And if we go back to what I talked about with Octobrush, I think that having to get a certain weapon distance from the opponent to get a 2-shot was kind of interesting and made the weapon unique. Does Paintbrush play around this 2-shot very much? No, not really. Paintbrush is usually going to be going for 3 shots. This is its more optimal kill range. Like, it is just better for the weapon environment you're dealing with. I'm not saying you will never 2-shot people. I'm not saying you will never shark in and do this. Like, you can. But this is so much more consistent and easier. And this is the kind of part of the weapon that is, you know, not as fun to deal with. I wish this weapon was balanced around the 2-shot range rather than the 3-shot range. because that would make the weapon, to me, less irritating. The weapon would have to get closer, and then it still has to deal with the wind-up weakness. That said, this weapon's also not good. It doesn't get picked. It is very rare to see this weapon used, and that's a whole other issue. Before I get to that, let's talk about rolling. Rolling on this weapon has a wider paint trail, which means while it doesn't have ink res, it is still a little bit less likely to affect you. It means its paint while rolling is better, which is still somewhat helpful, and its rolling speed is actually sufficiently fast. It is faster than Octobrush, it's like 1.82. It is good enough to actually be used as a rolling tool, assuming you can get into the roll. And on top of that, without using a weird squid form tech, it is actually faster to get into rolling than it is into squid form. I wish this was even faster than this. I wish Paintbrush was even faster to get into rolling without changing its squid form increase, because this could be faster, and I think this would be really unique to make faster. The idea that it has to depend on rolling to have a better movement option is a really unique idea. And yeah, now we can get into the weird ink brush tech thing, which I don't even really remember how to do. Do I remember? Hold on a second, let me see if I even remember. I did a video on it a while back, so I guess I could just check that, but I'm pretty sure it's just holding ZL. And you go into squid form faster. But let me double check. Okay, I was wrong. You have to hold ZR down. There we go. You can see the brush does a little fucking flick back here. Like that. It kind of goes back. And you have to press ZL fast enough. Yep, and the brush will have a weird animation quirk, and you get into the floor 2 frames faster. Thanks, fire rate buffs, unintended consequences. So that's a thing. But yeah, I don't have a problem with that tech existing, really, because it doesn't make too much of a difference. But yeah, like, basically all I'm saying, I think that emphasizing flicking into rolling faster would be cool. I think emphasizing the weapon's unique need to get into super close range to 2-shot and make the 3-shot less optimal would be good reworks for the weapon to help its identity a little bit. And I think, you know, outside of that, maybe you could make the ink efficiency a little bit there as well. Outside of that, though, what would I like for this weapon? This. I want this change. Look, I think Paintbrush as a pure Slayer is going to be never that fun for the game. I think you have to balance it out by making it more supportive. So yeah, I'm kind of asking to go with the Dynamo route. Make this paint better, but slightly increase the ink efficiency, like 5% more on the flicks or whatever. And then the other changes I mentioned. And I think then you have an identity for a weapon that's pretty cool. Because you can paint passively, but not for very long, even if very well, similar to Dynamo. You can play for up-close 2-shots if you want to shark in, but in exchange your 3-shot range isn't as good. And then the rolling change means when you're moving around enemies and you engage enemies, it's really important you keep an eye on your ink tank, because you're going to want to flick and then roll around rather than using squid form right away. So you need to make sure you have enough ink tank to utilize that, and that emphasizes more of the brush mobility. That is my current thoughts on like what I want Paintbrush to become. Is it feasible? Probably not. A while ago, I also talked about a different change for the weapon, which is the idea that after rolling, you would be able to flick instantly instead of having to go through the wind-up again. I still like this change. I acknowledge it would probably need to be balanced around more than I originally talked about. You probably have to reduce its like max range, kill range, or something like that. And you know what? I still think that would be worth it. Because like with what I talked about before, I think emphasizing the rolling in a unique way is really important for this weapon, and I think that would be a fun way to tweak it. And this really gets to my whole thing when talking about brushes. I think that brushes outside of ink brush are not properly balanced around rolling. I think rolling needs to be emphasized more for Octobrush and Paintbrush. I think that should be a bigger part of the weapon. I think brushes lost a bit of their identity without damage overlapping. Inkbrush got tweaks for that, Octobrush didn't, and Paintbrush was made less interesting with how they balanced the weapon. I think it has less of an identity. And I haven't even talked about the kits, because like, the kits to me don't really work super well for this weapon. The pure slaying one has a wave breaker, the supportive one has a main weapon that doesn't want to play support, and then you have this weird middle ground thing. If you made Paintbrush more of a support, this kit would work pretty well, but I still like the fact that this one has a curling bomb, because I think that helps with the weapon's mobility a bit. There are many directions to tweak this weapon, you know? I've thrown out a lot of ideas for this weapon in terms of changes and reworks that I would like to see. And, like, That's because I like to see them. I think that there's a lot of interesting ways to make Paintbrush less annoying, to give it more of an identity, and to keep it as a special weapon. And like, unlike other annoying options, I can't just go, yeah, you could probably just remove it, because brushes have 3 weapons, and brushes have had 2 weapons until this game. This is the only new thing brushes have gotten, and I would preferably like them to be able to keep it. You know, I think it would be kind of interesting if we could do something about it. But there's work to be done to me. This is a weapon that needs to be looked at for more significant changes into the next game, you know, as is my hope with many other weapons, and I don't know how feasible it is to happen. As a whole for brushes, I think they just could be more interesting. I like what they did with Ink Brush. Please give that kind of treatment to the other 2 brushes one day. So yeah, that's my thoughts on all the brushes.